At 2 o'clock in the morning, my 5-year-old grandson called from an old phone and whispered, "Grandpa, Mommy told me to push my dresser against the door when Daddy gets angry." Minutes later, my daughter called, barely breathing, "Dad, please come get me." Then the line went dead. When I reached her in-law's estate, her mother-in-law stared down from the window and ordered me to leave. I backed up my old truck and drove straight through their iron gate. But when I found my daughter unconscious beside the bed, drugged and covered in bruises, I made a decision. I was not only bringing her home, I was taking apart everything they owned. I'm grateful you chose to spend your time here. Truly. Now tell me something, where in the world are you watching this? Drop your city or country below. Every single comment means this story reaches one more person who needs it. This story contains fictional elements woven in for depth and meaning. Names and places are not drawn from any specific individuals, but the lessons inside are ones I hope you carry with you. The light above the kitchen sink had been on since 9 o'clock that evening. That was Dorothy's way. 40 years of marriage, and I still could not convince her to turn it off before bed. She always said the same thing whenever I pointed it out. "A light on means someone's coming home, Jean. You don't turn it off until everyone's home." Laura had been gone 6 years. Married, moved across town, building her own life. But Dorothy still left that light on every single night. I used to tease her about it. I had not teased her about it in a long time. I was sitting in my recliner in the dark living room, still in my work shirt and jeans, a cup of coffee gone cold on the end table beside me. Outside, the October wind pushed dead leaves against the front window. The old house on Sycamore Drive in Donelson creaked the way it always did when the temperature dropped, a low, settling groan in the walls, like the house itself was pulling its coat tighter. I should have been in bed. Dorothy had gone up at 10, kissed me on the cheek, told me not to stay up too late. But I could not make myself move. Not after the phone call at 11:30. It had been Caleb, 5 years old, calling from a number I did not recognize, his little voice so hushed I almost could not hear him over the wind outside. "Grandpa," he had whispered. "Are you awake?" I sat straight up the moment I heard him. "Caleb, baby, where are you?" "Whose phone is this, Mommy's old one," he said. "The one in her drawer. I'm not supposed to touch it." My chest tightened. "Where's your mama, buddy?" A pause, long enough to make my stomach drop. "She's in the bedroom. She was crying before. She stopped now." Another pause. "Daddy was really loud tonight, Grandpa. He was yelling. I heard stuff fall down." I pressed the phone so hard against my ear, the plastic dug into the side of my face. "Are you in your room right now?" "Yes, sir." His voice was barely a whisper. I pushed my dresser against the door like Mommy showed me. My throat closed around whatever I was about to say next. Laura had taught a 5-year-old boy to barricade his bedroom door. My little girl had taught her son that as casually as other mothers teach their children to look both ways before crossing the street. I breathed in slow and steady through my nose, so the boy would not hear the way my hands had started to shake. "You did exactly right, Caleb," I managed. "You're being so brave. You keep that door right where it is, okay? Can you do that for me?" "Yes, sir." A sniffle. "Grandpa, is Mommy going to be okay?" I squeezed my eyes shut for a half second. "Your mama's going to be just fine. I promise you that. Now you put that phone back where you found it, and you try to get some sleep, all right?" "Okay." Then so quietly, I almost missed it. "I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, buddy. More than you know." The line clicked off. I set the phone down on my knee. The cold coffee sat untouched. The kitchen light glowed yellow through the doorway. I stared at the wall across from me and thought about a little boy pushing a dresser in front of his door, and I felt something move through my chest, that was not quite rage and not quite grief. It was something older and heavier than either of those things. I thought about last Christmas. Laura had worn a long-sleeved blouse the whole day, even though Dorothy kept the house warm enough to grow tomatoes indoors. When Dorothy asked her if she was cold, Laura laughed and said she was always cold in the winter. I had noticed the way she kept her left wrist turned inward when she passed the rolls across the table. I had noticed. I had told myself I was reading too much into things. I had told myself a man ought to respect his daughter's marriage and not go looking for trouble where there might not be any. I had been a coward dressed up as a respectful father. That was the truth of it. And sitting in that dark living room at 11:30, I let myself feel the full weight of it. I must have dozed off in the chair somewhere close to 1 in the morning because the phone ringing at 2 o'clock jerked me upright so hard I knocked the cold coffee off the end table. The mug hit the hardwood and bounced spinning in a slow circle. I grabbed the phone off the armrest. Laura's name was on the screen. Laura. I was already on my feet. Baby, talk to me. What came through the phone was not my daughter's voice. It was something that used to be her voice, a thin, broken, frightened sound that came in pieces like she was trying to speak through water. Dad. A breath. Daddy. Another breath, ragged and wet. Help me, please help me. Laura. My voice came out steady even though every muscle in my body had gone rigid. Where are you? Are you at the house? I can't. They won't, Dad, please. A sound in the background. A voice, male, low and sharp, the exact tone of a man who wants to frighten without shouting. And then the line went dead. Not a dropped call, not a lost signal. Dead. The kind of dead that meant someone had ended it deliberately. I stood in the middle of my living room for exactly 3 seconds. I counted them because that was the last time I stood still for the rest of the night. Then I moved. I grabbed my jacket off the hook by the door. I laced my boots in the dark by feel fingers moving fast and certain the way they do when you have tied work boots every morning for 40 years. I snatched my keys off the kitchen counter and stopped for half a second at the bottom of the stairs. Dorothy was still asleep up there. She needed her sleep. Her heart had been giving her trouble since the summer. If I woke her up right now, she would insist on coming with me. She would sit in that passenger seat and hold her breath the entire drive, and her blood pressure would climb, and there was nothing she could do that I could not do faster alone. I pressed my hand flat against the wall at the bottom of the stairs just for a moment. Just long enough to feel the solid, familiar texture of the plaster under my palm. I'm going to get her, Dorothy, I said under my breath, too quiet for anyone to hear. I'm going to bring her home. I walked out the front door. The October air hit me like a cold fist. The old Chevy Silverado sat in the driveway, silver paint gone dull under the glow of the street lamp front bumper, holding a dent from a job site incident back in 2019. The truck had 240,000 miles on it. People looked at it and saw a beater. I looked at it and saw something that had never let me down. I got in. The engine turned over with a low, grinding cough and then settled into its usual rumble. I backed out of the driveway onto Sycamore Drive. The kitchen light glowed behind me through the front window, steady and yellow and faithful. I did not look back. I pointed the truck south toward Brentwood and pressed the gas to the floor. The interstate was empty at 2:15 in the morning. I pushed the Silverado to 82 miles per hour on I-65 South, watching the white lane markers blur into a single unbroken line beneath the headlights. The heater was broken on the passenger side, had been for 2 years, so the cab was cold, and my breath came out in thin clouds that dissolved against the windshield. I did not feel the cold. I felt nothing except the sound of Laura's voice looping in my head. Dad. Daddy. Help me, please help me. I had driven this stretch of highway 1,000 times. Job sites in Brentwood, supply runs down to Franklin, Saturday mornings taking Laura to swim practice when she was 12 years old, her hair still wet from the shower, a granola bar in one hand, and her swim bag in the other. She used to fall asleep against the window before we even hit the Harding Place exit. I would turn the radio down without thinking about it. Just a reflex. You do not wake a sleeping kid. She trusted me then, without even knowing she was doing it. The way children trust completely without conditions, without a single thought, that it might not be deserved. I pressed the gas harder. The Alcott house sat at the end of Pembroke Court, in Brentwood, in one of those neighborhoods where the driveways were longer than most city blocks, and the landscaping looked like it was maintained by people who had never once had to mow their own lawn. I had been here exactly 4 times since Laura married Preston Alcott 3 years ago. 4 times in 3 years, and each visit felt like crossing a border into a country that did not want me there. I turned off the main road and onto Pembroke Court. The street lamps were the old-fashioned kind, wrought iron posts with amber globes spaced far enough apart that the darkness pooled between them. Every house sat back from the road behind a wall of mature oak trees. In October, those trees were bare, and their branches clawed at the sky like outstretched hands. I pulled up to the Alcott gate and hit the brakes. It was a serious piece of ironwork. 2 panels of black wrought iron set between stone pillars 8 feet tall, with a keypad mounted on a post to the left. The kind of gate that said very clearly, "You are not welcome here unless we decide you are." A light mounted above the left pillar flooded the driveway in harsh white light the moment I stopped. I rolled my window down and pressed the call button on the intercom. Static, then silence. I pressed it again. "This is Eugene Stafford, Laura's father. Open the gate." More silence. Then a light came on in the upper left window of the house, the master bedroom. A figure appeared behind the glass, and even from 30 yards away, I could see it was a woman in a robe looking down at me the way you look at something unpleasant you have found on the bottom of your shoe. The window slid open. Sylvia Alcott's voice carried down through the cold night air with the kind of precision that comes from a lifetime of making sure people heard exactly what she intended them to hear. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" She called down, her voice wrapped in false patience. "Laura is asleep. She had a difficult evening and she is resting. Go home, Mr. Stafford." "Open the gate, Sylvia." I kept my voice flat. "Laura called me, I heard her voice. Laura calls you when she has been drinking." Sylvia pulled her robe tighter around herself with a small theatrical shiver. "She gets emotional. It is a pattern. Surely you have noticed it by now." She tilted her head slightly. "I do feel for you, I truly do. It must be embarrassing at your age driving that old truck across town in the middle of the night because your daughter cannot manage her emotions like an adult." My jaw tightened. I breathed out slow through my nose. "You have a 10-year-old vehicle held together with rust and stubbornness. She continued warming to the performance now, and you show up at my home at 2 in the morning like some kind of—" She paused, letting the pause do its work. "Well, like what you are. Go home. Before I call the police and let them sort out what exactly you think you are doing here." She started to pull the window shut. I put the Silverado in reverse. Sylvia stopped. She watched me back up across the width of the cul-de-sac, the truck's rear bumper stopping just short of the curb on the opposite side. She frowned. Her hand rested on the window frame. "What are you doing?" she called out. "Mr. Stafford, what on earth?" I put the truck in drive. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. The Silverado's engine gave a sound like a bull coming out of a chute, low, enormous, rising fast. The tires bit into the asphalt with a shriek of rubber that tore through the quiet neighborhood like a gunshot. I had maybe 40 yards of runway. I used all of it. The impact was everything at once. The crash of steel on iron, the crack of the left stone pillar splitting at the base, the gate panels flying, one crumpling against the driveway, the other spinning sideways into the ornamental bushes alongside the entrance. The Silverado lurched and shuddered, the steering wheel jumping in my hands, the hood crumpling slightly at the front edge where it had caught the center post. I drove straight through, up the driveway past the fountain that was already drained for winter, up to the front steps. Steam hissed from somewhere near the radiator. I kicked the door open and stepped out onto the brick pavers. Sylvia was screaming from the upstairs window, her composure gone, her voice raw and ugly. "You animal. You absolute animal. I am calling the police right now. Do you hear me?" I heard her. I walked toward the front door. It opened before I reached it. Preston Alcott filled the doorway in a gray t-shirt and boxers, his hair flattened on one side, his eyes red and glassy with alcohol and interrupted sleep. He was 37 years old and looked 10 years older than that. He threw his arm across the doorframe. "Back up," he said, his voice thick. "You cannot be here. You need to leave right now." I looked at him for exactly 1 second. I reached up, took hold of his forearm, and moved him out of my way the same way you move a door that is not latched properly. He stumbled sideways into the doorframe, grabbing it for balance. "Laura," I called out, stepping into the foyer. "Laura, it's Dad. Where are you?" The house smelled of expensive candles and something else underneath, something sharp and chemical that did not belong. I moved toward the staircase. The smell got stronger with every step I climbed. Not candles, not cleaning products. Something medicinal and wrong, the kind of smell that belongs in a hospital corridor at 3 in the morning, not in a private home. My hand slid up the polished mahogany banister, and I took the stairs 2 at a time. My work boots loud on the hardwood, not caring about the noise. "Laura," I called again. "Baby, answer me." The hallway at the top of the stairs was wide and carpeted in dove gray. 4 doors all closed. Framed photographs lined the wall, the Alcott family at various stages of their performed happiness. Howard and Sylvia at a charity gala. Preston in a graduation gown. A professionally shot Christmas photo with Laura in it, standing slightly apart from the others, her smile the smile of someone who had been told to smile. I had seen that photo before on their social media page. I had looked at it and thought she looked beautiful. Now I looked at it and saw a woman trying to disappear in plain sight. I tried the first door. A guest room undisturbed. I tried the second. A home office, dark. Then I heard it. The smallest sound, barely there, a soft, rhythmic scrape from behind the third door, like someone shifting their weight on a hardwood floor. I pushed the door open. The master bedroom was large and expensively furnished, a king bed, with a white upholstered headboard, matching nightstand's curtains that cost more than my first truck. Everything was in its place, except for the glass of water knocked over on Preston's side of the bed, the contents soaked into the carpet in a dark stain. Laura was not in the bed. My eyes dropped to the floor on the far side of the room, and my heart stopped beating for what felt like a very long time. She was curled on her side between the bed and the window, her knees drawn up toward her chest, her cheek pressed against the hardwood floor. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt, one of Preston's by the size of it, and her bare legs were pale as chalk beneath the hem. Her dark hair was loose and tangled, fanned out around her head. She was breathing. I could see the small, irregular rise and fall of her ribcage from the doorway, but the sound of it, shallow and slow like a candle fighting to stay lit in a draft, drove me across that room faster than I had moved in 20 years. "Laura." I dropped to both knees on the floor beside her, the impact sending a jolt up through my bad knee that I did not feel. I put my hand on her shoulder, her upper arm, and felt it. Not just the thinness of her, though, that alone was enough to make my vision blur. I felt the bones, her shoulder blade moving under my palm like something unprotected and fragile. I could feel her spine through the fabric of the shirt. She had lost 30 pounds since Christmas. Maybe more. "Laura, baby, it's Dad. I'm right here." My voice came out lower than I intended, rougher. I got my arm under her shoulders and lifted her upper body gently off the floor, cradling her head. Her eyelids fluttered. Her lips parted. "Dad." The word came out slow and thick, like it had to travel a long distance to reach her mouth. "Dad, you're here!" "I'm here." My throat felt like it was closing around something sharp. "I've got you. Can you look at me?" she tried. Her eyes opened halfway, the pupils slow to focus, drifting before they found my face. When they did, something in her expression broke open, not relief exactly, more like the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding themselves together for a very long time and has finally been given permission to stop. "I knew you'd come," she breathed. "I kept saying it. I kept telling myself you'd come. I'm here now." I pushed the hair back from her face with my free hand. Her skin was cold and dry. "I need you to stay awake for me, okay? Keep talking to me." I pulled back the loose sleeve of the t-shirt to check her arm, and what I saw there made the air go out of my lungs like I had been hit with something heavy. Bruising along the inside of her forearm, not one bruise, multiple at different stages of healing, layered over each other in shades of yellow and purple and deep, ugly green. The pattern was not random. They were the shape of a hand, specifically of fingers, 4 distinct elongated marks on the outside of her arm, and a wider one from a thumb on the inside, the kind of marks that come from being grabbed and held. My vision went red at the edges. I breathed in through my nose, slow and deliberate, and breathed it back out. "Laura." I kept my voice steady for her. "Did Preston do this?" Her eyes filled up and spilled over immediately, tears running sideways across the bridge of her nose and onto my sleeve. She nodded once, a small, exhausted movement. I held her tighter and pressed my mouth to the top of her head. I stayed like that for 3 seconds. 3 seconds to let myself feel what I felt. The grief, the fury, the guilt that was already rising in my chest like floodwater because I had known something was wrong, and I had told myself I was overreacting. 3 seconds. Then I got my arms under her and stood up. She weighed almost nothing. That was what undid me, not the bruises, not the drugs they had clearly given her, not even the bones I could feel through the fabric. It was the weight of her, or the absence of it. I had lifted lumber heavier than my daughter. I had carried concrete blocks that gave more resistance than the woman I was holding in my arms. I walked out of the bedroom and into the hallway. Preston appeared at the top of the stairs, blocking my path. His face had changed. The alcohol fog was burning off, fast, replaced by something colder. He put both hands up. "Cornelius, wait." He started and then caught himself. "Mr. Stafford, listen to me. She needs medical attention, I agree with you, but this is not the way. Move," I said. Something in my voice must have reached whatever was left of his survival instincts, because he stepped aside. I walked past him with Laura in my arms, her head against my shoulder, her breathing slow and uneven against my neck. "You told me she was sleeping," I said as I passed him without looking at him. "A man who does this to a woman does not get to talk to me about what she needs." I carried her down the stairs, through the foyer, out through the front door, and into the cold October air. Sylvia was standing on the front steps with her phone pressed to her ear, her face white with fury. Her eyes went to Laura in my arms and stayed there for a moment, not with concern, not with guilt, but with the cold calculation of someone assessing a problem. "Ah, the police are on their way," she said. Her voice had gone quiet and precise. "You have committed criminal trespass. You have assaulted my son. You will put her down right now and wait for the authorities." I walked past her to the Silverado. I opened the passenger door and eased Laura into the seat, getting the seatbelt across her without jostling her arm. Her head drooped against the headrest, and her eyes slid shut. "Stay awake, baby," I said, pressing my hand to her cheek. "Talk to me. Tell me anything. What did you have for dinner last Tuesday?" A faint, broken sound came out of her that might have been a laugh. "I don't remember," she murmured. "Dad, I know what they're going to do." I closed the passenger door gently and walked around to the driver's side. In the distance, so faint it might have been wind, I heard the first wail of a siren. I got in. I started the engine. I looked at Laura, then at the shattered gate lying across the driveway in the amber wash of the street lamp. I had come here to get my daughter. I had her. But as I reached for the gear shift, the siren grew louder, and the first pulse of blue and red light appeared at the end of Pembroke Court, flooding the bare oak trees with color. They had gotten here faster than I expected, and I was parked at the end of a driveway with a crumpled gate behind me and nowhere left to go. There were 3 cruisers blocking the end of the driveway. 6 officers had poured out of them by the time I stepped out of the Silverado with my hands raised above my head. The blue and red lights strobed across the bare oak trees and the crumpled iron gate and the cracked stone pillar, painting everything in alternating pulses of color. I kept my eyes on the officers and my hands where they could see them, and I did not make any sudden movements because I was a 67-year-old man in a wealthy white neighborhood at 3 in the morning, and I understood exactly how this looked. "Get on the ground!" The lead officer shouted, one hand on his holster. "On the ground right now." "My daughter is in the passenger seat," I said loud and clear. "She needs an ambulance. She is unconscious and she has been drugged." "Sir," I said, "on the ground." "Call an ambulance first." I kept my voice level. "Please, she cannot wait." A second officer was already moving toward the passenger side of the truck, shining his flashlight through the glass. He saw Laura slumped against the headrest, and his posture changed immediately. He grabbed his radio. I lowered myself to my knees on the brick pavers. The cold came up through my jeans instantly. My hands stayed up. 2 officers were on me within seconds, pulling my arms behind my back, and the zip tie bit into my wrists before I had the chance to take a breath. One of them pressed down on my shoulder blades, not hard enough to be brutality, but hard enough to make the point that my size and cooperation were not the same thing. "You have the right to remain silent," one of them said into my ear. His voice was young and recited. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Sylvia Alcott's voice cut across the driveway from the front steps. She had changed into actual clothes in the time it had taken the police to arrive, pressed slacks and a blouse not a hair out of place. She moved toward the lead officer with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent decades getting people to listen to her. "That man broke down our gate," she said, her voice precise and controlled and devastatingly calm. "He assaulted my son. He was attempting to abduct my daughter-in-law against her will. We have been trying to get her medical help for months, and he keeps interfering." I turned my head as far as the officer's hand would allow. An ambulance had pulled up behind the cruisers. 2 paramedics were opening the passenger door of the Silverado, speaking quietly to Laura, checking her pulse. "She is going to be okay," I said, mostly to myself. "She has to be okay." They did not put me in the back of a cruiser immediately. They made me kneel on the driveway for 11 minutes while Sylvia talked to the sergeant. I counted the minutes by watching the ambulance. The paramedics had Laura on a gurney by minute 4. By minute 7, they had an IV line in her arm. By minute 9, the ambulance doors closed. By minute 11, it pulled away down Pembroke Court with its lights going, and I watched it until it disappeared around the corner, and the sound of it faded into the neighborhood quiet. Then they put me in the car. The booking room at the South Precinct smelled of burnt coffee and industrial floor cleaner. A sergeant behind a scarred wooden desk processed me with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had done this 10,000 times and expected to do it 10,000 more. He asked my name. He asked my address. He asked my occupation. Retired contractor, I said. He typed it without looking up. Retired from what exactly? Breaking and entering. I looked at him steadily. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, the kind of face that had spent a long time deciding it did not need to be pleasant to anyone. Retired from building half the job sites in this county, I said, including the parking structure attached to this building. He stopped typing. He looked at me for the first time since I had sat down. Then he looked back at his screen and kept typing. "Put him in holding," he said to the officer beside him. The holding cell was a concrete room with a metal bench along one wall and a drain in the center of the floor. The overhead light was fluorescent and hummed at a frequency designed to prevent any possibility of rest. A man in his 30s was asleep or something like asleep on the far end of the bench, his jacket pulled over his face. I sat down. I put my elbows on my knees and my face in my hands, and I breathed. The guilt was the worst part. Not the cold, not the hard bench, not the hum of the light or the smell of the drain. The guilt because I had known something was wrong for more than a year. I had seen the long sleeves at Christmas. I had heard the way Laura's voice changed when Preston was in the room, flatter, more careful, like someone choosing each word to avoid a landmine. I had told myself I was overreacting. I had told myself she would come to me when she was ready. I had told myself that respecting her marriage meant not asking questions she had not invited. She had taught her 5-year-old son to push a dresser in front of his door. And I had been sitting in my recliner watching cable news. I pressed my palms hard against my eyes until I saw white. Then I lowered my hands and sat up straight on that metal bench. And I made myself a promise that was quieter and colder and more absolute than anything I had ever sworn in my life. Whatever it took, however long it took. I was going to dismantle every single thing the Alcott family had built piece by piece until there was nothing left for them to hide behind. At 5 a.m, the cell door buzzed open. "Stafford," the guard said, checking his clipboard. "Lawyer's here." I stood up. My knees ached, and my back was stiff, and I felt every one of my 67 years in my bones. But I walked out of that cell with my chin up and my shoulders straight, and I did not look like a man who had spent 2 hours on a concrete bench in the dark. I looked like a man with a plan. The consultation room was barely large enough for the table and 2 chairs inside it. Leonard Shaw was already seated when the guard brought me in. He was 68 years old, built like a former linebacker gone careful with age, with silver hair cut close to his head and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had been my attorney for 22 years. He had helped me structure every shell company, every property acquisition, every trust document that kept my real financial picture invisible to the outside world. He was the only person alive besides Dorothy who knew the full scope of what Eugene Stafford actually owned. He looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient who has just done something inadvisable but not entirely unexpected. "Sit down, Jean," he said. I sat. "Where is she?" "Vanderbilt University Medical Center. She is stable." He opened the folder in front of him before I could exhale fully. Severely malnourished, dehydrated, and they found high levels of sedatives in her bloodstream. Lorazepam primarily. Nothing consistent with recreational drug use, consistent with someone being medicated without their knowledge or consent over an extended period. my hands curled into fists on top of the table. And Preston, not charged with anything yet. He is telling the police that Laura has a history of substance abuse and that you forced your way into the home and attacked him. Leonard's voice was completely flat. Sylvia is supporting that account. Of course she is. I pressed my fist against my mouth for a moment hard, then lowered it. What are the charges against me? A criminal trespass, vandalism for the gate, assault. Preston is claiming you struck him. Leonard looked at me over his glasses. Did you? I moved him out of a doorway. That is what I will argue. He turned a page. Bail was denied this morning at the emergency hearing. The judge cited risk of further property destruction and potential danger to the Alcott family. I felt the air go out of me. Denied. On what grounds specifically? On the grounds that Howard Alcott has been playing golf with Judge Carver for 15 years, Leonard said, and for the first time his voice had an edge to it. It is not in the record, but it is the reason. The room was very quiet for a moment. The fluorescent light above us buzzed the same maddening frequency as the one in the holding cell. I looked at the scratched surface of the metal table and thought about Laura in a hospital bed at Vanderbilt, with sedatives in her blood, and I thought about Caleb pushing a dresser against his bedroom door, and I thought about the gate I had driven through 6 hours ago. Leonard, I said, do you have the red folder? He went very still. He looked at me over his reading glasses with the expression of a man who understood exactly what he was being asked, and exactly what it meant. Jean, do you have it? A long pause. It is in my office safe, where it has been for 12 years. I want you to open it. Leonard took his glasses off his forehead and set them on the table. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands, the gesture of a man buying himself 3 seconds to think. If we open that folder, he said carefully, we are not just hiring investigators and filing motions. We are talking about moving significant capital in ways that will attract attention. We are talking about acquisitions that will raise questions about who you really are and what you actually own. I know what we are talking about. The Alcotts will lawyer up the moment the money starts moving. Howard has connections at the state level. If they start pulling at threads, Leonard. I leaned forward slightly. They drugged my daughter. They have been doing it for months. She weighs 110 pounds. I could feel her spine when I picked her up. My voice did not rise. It dropped. Open the folder. Leonard looked at me for a long moment. Then he put his glasses back on, reached into his briefcase, and produced a legal pad. He clicked his pen. All right, he said. Tell me what you want. First, I want you to find out who holds the mortgage on the Alcott property in Brentwood. I kept my voice even and methodical, the same voice I used when I was going through blueprints on a job site. Find out who holds the note on Preston's car. Find out what lines of credit Howard is servicing and who his lenders are. Leonard was writing. And when I find out, buy it, I said. All of it. Whatever it costs. It will take several days to structure the transfers properly, Leonard said. These are private lenders. There are legal procedures. Then start today, I said. I want them in default notice before the end of the week. Leonard's pen stopped moving. He looked up. Every debt they carry, I said. Every mortgage payment they are behind on. Every note they have outstanding. I want to own it. I want to be the one they owe. Can you do that by end of business today? It will take significant liquidity, Leonard said slowly. We are talking about moving money out of accounts that have never been touched for exactly this reason. I know what we are moving and where it comes from. I held his gaze. I built that reserve over 40 years for exactly this kind of moment. I did not think the moment would look like this. But here we are. Leonard studied me for another second. Then he wrote something at the top of the legal pad, underlined it twice, and looked back up. I am also going to need an investigator. Someone who can move fast and does not care about being popular. Marcus Webb, I said immediately. He is in my phone. Tell him I sent you and tell him I need everything there is to know about Preston Alcott's financial situation. Bank accounts, business partners, outstanding debts, business losses, everything going back 5 years. Webb is expensive. Leonard. I looked at him steadily. Do I look like a man worried about the cost? He almost smiled. It was a grim, brief thing, but it was there. He stood up, gathered his legal pad, and knocked twice on the door for the guard. Before it opened, he turned back to me. The Alcotts have spent 30 years building their reputation in this city, he said quietly. Howard knows every developer, every city councilman, every judge on the civil bench. He paused. How long do you think it will take us to undo all of that? I thought about Laura on a hospital bed. I thought about Caleb and his dresser. Not long enough to satisfy me, I said, but long enough to make sure they feel every single minute of it. Leonard nodded once. The door opened. He walked out, and I sat alone in the consultation room and listened to the hum of the fluorescent light, and felt something settle into place in my chest, cold and precise and absolute, like a foundation being poured. They had used their money and their connections to take everything from my daughter. They were about to find out that the retired contractor with the beat-up truck had been building something of his own for a very long time, and unlike their world built on reputation and borrowed money and other people's fear, mine was built on concrete. It did not crack, it did not bend, and it did not forgive. Leonard got me out at 8:45 in the morning on a temporary release pending arraignment. He did not explain how. He never explained how. In 22 years, I had learned that Leonard Shaw operated in the space between what was possible and what was merely allowed, and he preferred to keep the details of that space to himself. What mattered was that I walked out of the South Precinct into a gray October morning with my belt back in my pants and my keys back in my pocket, and Leonard was waiting beside his black sedan with a paper cup of coffee and the expression of a man who had not slept. Vanderbilt called, he said, handing me the cup before I could ask. Laura is awake. She is asking for you and Dorothy. Something in my chest cracked open and then sealed itself back up again before I could feel the full weight of it. Can I see her? Not yet. Leonard held up one hand. Preston filed a temporary restraining order this morning. Standard language: stay 500 yards from Laura, from the Alcott residence, from Preston himself. He paused. And from Caleb. The coffee cup bent slightly in my hand. I loosened my grip before it gave way entirely. They filed against me, seeing my own grandson. Howard moved fast. He knows people at the courthouse. Leonard opened the passenger door of the sedan. Get in. Marcus Webb is waiting for us. Marcus Webb kept his office on the 3rd floor of a building on Charlotte Avenue that looked like it had been constructed sometime during the Eisenhower administration and had not been significantly updated since. The elevator was out of service. We took the stairs. The hallway smelled of old carpet and copy toner, and the frosted glass on Marcus's door read simply, Webb Investigations. No tagline. No list of services. Men who were good at what Marcus did not need to advertise. He was standing at his window when we walked in, a thick manila folder tucked under one arm, looking out at the Cumberland River, catching the late morning light. He was 52 years old, lean and sharp-featured, with the careful stillness of someone who spent a lot of time watching and very little time being watched. He turned when we entered and handed the folder directly to me without preamble. "Sit down," he said. "This is going to take a few minutes." I sat. I opened the folder. Shatin Horichuk, Preston Alcott on paper, is a mid-level investment manager at a firm called Hargrove Capital Partners, Marcus said, moving to stand behind his desk. "Good salary, nice office in Green Hills. His clients think he manages a diversified portfolio with consistent returns." He tapped the first page in the folder. "In reality, he has been falsifying quarterly statements for 3 years. His actual portfolio is down $1.8 million. He has been covering the gap by shuffling client funds using new deposits to pay returns owed to existing investors." I looked up from the page. "That is securities fraud." "That is securities fraud," Marcus confirmed. "But it gets worse." He tapped the second section. 18 months ago, Preston started withdrawing from the joint savings account he shares with Laura. Not small amounts. He cleaned it out over 6 months in increments just under the federal reporting threshold, $9,000 at a time, always on a Friday afternoon. He paused. "The withdrawals were authorized by a signature that forensic analysis will very likely show is not Laura's." My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my temples. He forged her name. $340,000, Marcus said. "Gone. Used to cover margin calls on bad trades." He moved to the third section. "And then there is the land." I leaned forward. Marcus turned the folder to a survey map clipped to the inside cover, an aerial view of a stretch of riverfront property south of downtown Nashville, bordered on 3 sides by industrial lots that had been sitting empty since a manufacturing plant closed in 2018. I recognized it immediately. I had bought that land for $11,000 an acre in 2009, when it was contaminated industrial waste that nobody else wanted. I had spent 4 years and a significant amount of money cleaning it up. When Laura married Preston, I had transferred the deed to her name as a wedding gift. I had told her to hold on to it. I had told her it was her safety net. "The city approved a mixed-use development project 2 months ago," Marcus said. "Retail, hotel, residential. The anchor site is 3 blocks from that parcel." He let that land for a moment. "Laura's land is now worth somewhere between $10 and $12 million. Preston has a buyer lined up, a development group out of Atlanta. Cash offer. They have been waiting on a signed deed for 4 months." I set the folder down on the desk. I pressed both hands flat against my knees and breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth, slow and deliberate, the way I used to breathe on job sites when something went wrong and panic would have made it worse. "Laura refused to sell," I said. It was not a question. "Every time he brought it up," Marcus said. I pulled his emails. He tried pressure-guilt financial arguments. She told him the land was her father's gift, and she was not selling it. Marcus sat down in his chair. So he needed another way to get her signature, or to get around needing it. "If she is declared mentally incompetent," I said slowly, "control of her assets transfers to her spouse." "Medical guardianship," Marcus said. "Under Tennessee law, if a licensed physician certifies that an individual is incapable of managing their own affairs due to a medical condition, substance abuse, psychosis, severe mental illness, the court can assign a legal guardian. In the case of a married individual that defaults to the spouse in the absence of a prior designation." I sat back in the chair. The full weight of it settled over me like wet concrete, heavy and cold and hardening fast. They had not drugged Laura to punish her. They had not done it out of cruelty alone. They had drugged her to manufacture a medical record. They had been building a paper trail for months, a documented history of instability, of substance abuse, of psychiatric episodes, so that when they finally moved for guardianship, There would be a file thick enough to convince a judge. They were not trying to silence my daughter. They were trying to erase her. "Who is the physician?" I asked. My voice came out very quiet. Marcus opened the folder to the last page. "A man named Felix Morrow, concierge doctor. His practice is funded almost entirely by 3 families in the Brentwood area." He looked at me. "The Alcotts are one of them." I stood up. "Marcus," I said, "I want everything. Every account Preston has touched. Every email. Every phone call you can legally access. I want to know where Howard Alcott hides his money, and I want to know who else is on Felix Morrow's client list." I reached into my jacket for my checkbook. "Name your number." Marcus named it. I wrote the check without blinking. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at me. "Gene," he said. "Who exactly are you?" "Right now," I capped the pen, "I am the man who is going to repossess their lives." Leonard was on his phone before we even reached the bottom of the stairs. He was speaking in the clipped, precise shorthand he used when he was moving fast, and did not want to waste syllables, names, figures, account numbers, instructions, delivered with the efficiency of a man who had spent 4 decades turning complicated problems into manageable ones. By the time we reached his sedan on Charlotte Avenue, he had already made 3 calls. He held the door for me, got in the driver's side, and pulled into traffic before I had finished buckling my seatbelt. "The Alcott mortgage is held by a regional lender called Cumberland Valley Savings," he said, merging onto the interstate. "They are a mid-size operation. Private. The note on the Brentwood property is $4.2 million, and they are currently 3 payments behind." He glanced at me. "The lender has been extending grace periods because of who Howard is. They will not extend them for us." "Good," I said. "Make the approach. I want to own that note by end of business." Leonard nodded, already reaching for his phone again. I looked out the passenger window at Nashville, sliding past the construction cranes downtown, the new towers going up along the riverfront, the infrastructure of a city that was changing faster than its oldest families could absorb. I had built pieces of this city. My name was not on any of it. That had always been intentional. A man who worked in concrete and steel learned early that the things built to last were the ones sunk deep in the ground, where nobody could see them. We were pulling into the parking garage beside Leonard's office building on Church Street when his phone rang. He answered it on the car speakers. Leonard Shaw. A pause. Then a woman's voice came through, measured, professional, but with an undertone of urgency that she was working hard to contain. "This is Dr. Susan Merritt. I am a physician at Ridgeline Recovery Center. I need to speak with you about a patient named Laura Alcott." Another pause. "I was told to call this number by a man named Gene Stafford." Leonard looked at me. I leaned forward slightly toward the dashboard speaker. "This is Gene Stafford," I said. "Dr. Merritt, talk to me." A breath on the other end. Then, "Mr. Stafford, I cannot speak freely from this location. I have approximately 4 minutes before my next patient intake. What I can tell you is this: the clinical documentation in your daughter's file does not match the laboratory results that came back from the independent reference lab we use for confirmation testing." A pause. "The file says opioid dependency, acute psychosis, danger to self. The lab results show no opioids, no stimulants, no substances consistent with addiction." Her voice dropped lower. "What the results do show is a sustained therapeutic level of lorazepam consistent with daily administration over a period of several weeks. And your daughter did not self-administer that medication, Mr. Stafford. The IV access points on her left arm are not consistent with self-injection." I pressed my hand flat against the dashboard. My palm was cold against the plastic. "Where is she right now?" "Lower level. Room 14. She is not in danger of immediate physical harm, but she is heavily sedated. She has periods of clarity, but they do not last long. Dr. Merritt's voice tightened. I signed the intake forms that brought her here, Mr. Stafford, because I was told the documentation had been reviewed and approved by the attending of record. When I saw the lab discrepancy this morning, I requested the original physician's notes. They do not exist. There are no original notes. There is only a signed intake form from Dr. Felix Morrow and a letter from Preston Alcott requesting expedited placement. Leonard had stopped the car in the middle of the parking garage. He was writing on his legal pad with rapid, precise strokes. Dr. Merritt, I said, can you get her out? Not alone, and not without creating a paper trail that they will use to revoke my license before she reaches the front door. Another pause. But if someone came with the right documentation, a court order, a family petition, or a licensed physician willing to issue a counter-evaluation, I could facilitate access to the facility. I could make sure the right doors were accessible. How much time do we have? The facility director received a call this morning from Howard Alcott's office. He is requesting that Laura be transferred to a longer-term residential program in another state. I do not know which one. I do not know the timeline. But I would estimate... She stopped. A sound in the background, a door opening. Her voice went flat and professional instantly. Thank you for calling to inquire about our services. I will have someone follow up with you within 24 hours. The line went dead. Leonard and I sat in the parking garage for 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then Leonard tore the page off his legal pad and held it up. He had written 4 words in block letters, "Get a court order." How fast? I asked. She depends on the judge. Emergency family petition for access to a patient in a private medical facility. If I file this afternoon, and we draw the right judge possibly by tonight. If we draw the wrong one. He set the pad down. Howard has relationships on the civil bench, Jean. I am not going to pretend otherwise. Then we find a judge Howard does not play golf with, I said. Leonard almost smiled. I have one in mind. He started typing on his phone. There is something else. He reached into his briefcase without looking up and produced a USB drive, setting it on the center console between us. A man came to my office this morning while you were in holding. His name is Daniel Frost. He said he worked with Preston at Hargrove Capital until 14 months ago, when Preston had him terminated and reported to HR for a compliance violation that Frost says was fabricated. Leonard tapped the USB drive. He brought this. He says it contains internal emails from Preston's work account going back 2 years. Communications between Preston and Howard about the land sale, about Laura, about what they needed to do to make the sale happen. I picked up the drive. It was a small, ordinary thing, barely the size of my thumbnail, and it felt impossibly light for what it apparently contained. Has anyone else seen this? I asked. Only Frost. And now us. Leonard looked at me. Jean, if what is on that drive is what Frost says it is, this is not just civil. This is criminal conspiracy. This is fraud. This is potentially elder abuse statutes applied to a dependent adult. He held my gaze. This changes the nature of what we are doing. I closed my hand around the drive. I thought about Laura in room 14 of a facility built to make inconvenient people disappear. I thought about Caleb at home with the Alcotts being raised by people who had treated his mother like a problem to be managed. No, I said. It does not change the nature of what we are doing. It just gives us better tools. I put the drive in my shirt pocket against my chest, next to where my heart was beating. Now let us go find a judge. I had bought the table 2 days earlier, Before any of this began, $25,000 routed through a holding company with no visible connection to the name Eugene Stafford secured the moment Marcus told me about the gala. Table number 1, center of the room front and closest to the stage. $25,000 paid through a holding company that had no visible connection to the name Eugene Stafford. Table number 1, center of the room front and closest to the stage. The Alcott Family Foundation annual benefit dinner at the Hermitage Hotel, Nashville's oldest grand hotel, 12 stories of Beaux-Arts limestone on 6th Avenue. The kind of place that had hosted presidents and governors and people who believed that attending the right events was the same thing as doing good in the world. I had one suit. I had bought it in the spring of 2021 for Laura's rehearsal dinner at a department store on Gallatin Pike, off a rack altered by a tailor in Antioch for $60. It was dark navy, slightly shiny at the elbows now, and it fit me the way suits fit men who do not spend much time in suits. Dorothy had pressed it for me that afternoon while I showered, moving the iron in careful strokes across the lapels without being asked. She did not say anything while she did it. She pressed that suit the way she left the kitchen light on quietly and with complete certainty about why it mattered. The Hermitage lobby smelled of cut flowers and old money. Men in tuxedos moved through the gilded corridors with the ease of people who had never once had to think about the cost of anything. Women in gowns that ran to the floor stood in clusters, their jewelry catching the chandelier light. I walked in among them in my department store suit and my good black shoes, and I felt every eye in the room make its calculation and arrive at its conclusion. I walked to table number 1 and sat down. Howard Alcott saw me from across the room. I watched the color leave his face in a slow, downward tide, starting at his forehead and ending somewhere around his collar. He leaned toward the man beside him, a city councilman I recognized from the news, and said something low and fast. The councilman looked at me. I poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher on the table and raised it slightly in Howard's direction. He looked away first. Sylvia took the stage at 7:30. She was wearing a deep burgundy gown and a strand of pearls, and she had clearly spent the afternoon preparing for this performance. Her voice trembled at exactly the right moments. Her eyes filled with tears that did not quite spill over, which was a harder technical achievement than most people realized. And our family has known heartbreak, she told the hushed room, pressing one hand briefly to her chest. We have watched someone we love struggle with addiction. We have tried to get her help. We have tried to stand by her even when it was painful, even when she pushed us away. She paused. Tonight, every dollar raised goes toward treatment programs for families going through exactly what we are going through. Because no family should have to face this alone. The applause was warm and generous. These were people who trusted Sylvia Alcott, because she had sat on the same boards and attended the same churches and sent her children to the same schools. They had no reason not to trust her. She was one of them. I sat at table number 1 and watched her use my daughter's suffering to fill a room with sympathy and open wallets, and I breathed through it the way you breathe through pain, steadily, deliberately, waiting for the moment it was useful. The auction began at 8. A week in Tuscany, a vintage bourbon collection, a custom saddle from a craftsman in Leiper's Fork. The room was generous, but measured the economy, having put a damper on even the wealthiest appetites. Then the auctioneer's voice lifted with genuine excitement. And now, ladies and gentlemen, our final item of the evening. Donated by Howard Alcott, a 1967 Rolex Daytona stainless steel original dial, recently appraised at $22,000. Howard was sitting at the head table near the stage, looking very much like a man who needed the money from this auction, rather than a man making a generous gift. The watch had come off his wrist last week. I knew because Marcus had told me. The bidding opened at $5,000. It climbed to 12 to 15 to 18. I raised my paddle. 28,000. The room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when something unexpected has happened. The auctioneer blinked at me. Howard turned in his chair and stared. Sylvia, standing at the edge of the stage, went very still. A voice from the left side of the room pushed back. 30,000. I did not look to see who it was. 35? Silence. The auctioneer cleared his throat. $35,000. Do I hear 36? He waited. Going once, going twice. The gavel came down. Sold to the gentleman at table 1. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I walked to the stage to collect the watch, and as I passed the end of Howard's table, I heard Sylvia say something under her breath, too quiet for the room, but not for me. 2 words clipped and cold that I did not need to make out fully to understand. The auctioneer handed me the watch in a velvet box. I held it for a moment. Then I turned and looked across the room. Near the kitchen entrance, a young woman in a catering uniform was on her knees on the marble floor, picking up the pieces of a broken serving tray. Her face was down, but I could see the red in her cheeks and the way her shoulders were shaking. An older woman in the same uniform stood over her, speaking in a fast, hard whisper. I recognized the older woman as the event catering supervisor. Sylvia Alcott had been speaking to her earlier in the evening near the kitchen doors with the clipped efficiency of someone issuing an instruction that was not optional. I stepped off the stage. I walked across the room toward the young woman on the floor. Conversations stalled as I passed. I crouched down beside her. "What's your name?" I asked. She looked up, startled, her eyes wet. "Rosa," she said. "Rosa Daniels." "Rosa." I opened the velvet box. "I would like you to have this." Her mouth opened. She stared at the watch, $35,000 of stainless steel and history, sitting in blue velvet. "Sir, I can't." "Ah, yes, you can." I set the box in her hands and closed her fingers around it. "Sell it. Do whatever you need to do with it. But don't you let anyone in this room make you feel like you are worth less than them." I stood up. "Because you're not." I walked out of the Hermitage Hotel without looking back. Behind me, I heard the room erupt, not applause, exactly more the collective exhale of people who had just witnessed something they could not quite categorize. Howard and Sylvia could sort out what it meant. I had made my point. Outside on 6th Avenue, the October night was cold and clear. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Marcus Webb. 4 words. "Gene, call me now." I called Marcus from the car before I had even cleared the Hermitage parking lot. He picked up on the first ring. "Dr. Merritt contacted me 20 minutes ago," he said, skipping any greeting. "The facility director got a second call from Howard's office this afternoon. They are moving Laura, not to another room, to another facility, out of state. She does not know where, she does not know when, but she said it will happen before the end of the week." My hand tightened on the wheel. Nashville slid past the windows in streaks of amber and white. Can she stall it? She filed an internal clinical review request. Buys maybe 48 hours before the director can override it. Marcus paused. "After that, I will call Leonard," I said. "Keep your phone on?" I drove home to Donaldson. The kitchen light was on. Of course it was. It was always on. Dorothy met me at the door before I got my key out. She was in her green cardigan, the one so old the elbows had gone thin, and she had the look on her face she got when she had been worrying all day and had run out of ways to make herself stop. She looked at my rumpled suit and then at my face, and she reached up and put both hands on either side of my jaw the way she had done since we were 23 years old, when she needed me to stop moving and actually look at her. "Tell me," she said. So I did. All of it. Marcus's report on Preston's finances, the forged withdrawals, the land, the lorazepam in Laura's blood. Dr. Merritt's calls the plan to move Laura out of state. Dorothy stood in the kitchen doorway and listened without interrupting something almost no one I had ever known could do. When I finished, she lowered her hands from my face and pressed them flat against her chest over her heart, and closed her eyes for 3 full seconds. "Jean." Her voice came out steady, but I could hear the cost of keeping it that way. "How soon can we get her out?" 48 hours if Leonard gets the right judge. Maybe less. I loosened my tie. "But there's something else I need to do tonight." The doorbell rang before I finished the sentence. 9:45 in the evening. I moved to the front window and looked out without turning on the porch light. A small woman in her 70s stood on the step, tan raincoat, large handbag held against her side like a shield. I did not recognize her immediately. Then she turned slightly under the porch lamp, and I placed the face I had seen it once through the rear window of Leonard's car on Pembroke Court, in the neighborhood across from the Alcott house. I opened the door. "Mr. Stafford." Her voice was soft, but not uncertain. She had decided to be here, and she was going to see it through. "My name is Eleanor Briggs. I live at 412 Pembroke Court, directly across from the Alcott family." She swallowed once. "I have seen things I should have reported a long time ago. I did not because I was afraid of Howard Alcott." She lifted her chin. "I am not afraid anymore." Dorothy stepped forward before I could speak. "Come inside, Mrs. Briggs," she said in the voice she used with students who were frightened and in over their heads. I just made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, under the warm light with the October wind outside. Eleanor Briggs talked for 40 minutes. She had seen Laura standing alone in the side yard at dusk, arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing, sometimes for an hour. She had seen Preston grab Laura by the arm in the driveway and drag her toward the front door, the way you drag something rather than someone. She had seen Caleb sitting on the porch step on a Sunday morning in his pajamas, crying quietly, with no one coming out to check on him. She had seen Howard's car in the driveway on a Tuesday, and through her upstairs window she had seen Laura pressed against the exterior wall of the house, with Howard's finger raised in her face and Laura's hands up in front of her chest, not fighting, just afraid. "I called the non-emergency police line once," Eleanor said, both hands around her coffee cup. "8 months ago, after I saw Preston push Laura into the doorframe hard enough that she stumbled." She looked down. "The officer who called back told me the Alcotts were a well-respected family, and that marital disagreements were not generally a matter for intervention unless there was a physical injury requiring medical attention." She looked up. "He asked if I was certain of what I had seen. The way he asked it made me feel like I was the one doing something wrong." Dorothy made a sound, short, involuntary, somewhere between a breath and a word. She pressed her lips together hard and reached across the table and covered Eleanor's hand with her own. "You are not doing anything wrong," Dorothy said, her voice thick and certain. "You are doing exactly the right thing. Right now. Tonight." Eleanor's eyes filled. She blinked hard, fighting it. Then she opened her handbag and produced a small external hard drive and set it on the table between us. "I have a security camera on my front porch," she said. "The angle covers the Alcott front gate and the first 30 feet of their driveway. 14 months of footage." She paused. "I watched some of it this morning when I heard what they were saying about you on the news. I looked at the hard drive. Then I looked at Eleanor Briggs. This small woman in a tan raincoat who had been afraid for 11 years and had driven herself across town in the dark because she had decided enough was enough." "Mrs. Briggs," I said, "if this goes to court, and it will, are you willing to testify to what you have told us tonight?" Eleanor straightened in her chair. She picked up her coffee cup with a steady hand. "Mr. Stafford," she said, I have been waiting 11 years to say these things out loud. You could not stop me from testifying if you tried. Dorothy squeezed my hand under the table fast and hard. I squeezed back. My phone rang. Leonard with news about the court order. I excused myself and stepped out onto the back porch into the cold night. Through the kitchen window, I could see Dorothy and Eleanor still at the table, heads bent toward each other, talking quietly under the warm light. 48 hours, I told myself. We just needed 48 hours. Leonard called at 10:45 with news about the court order. Judge Patricia Wynne, he said. She sat on the family court bench and had spent 12 years before that as a public defender. She did not golf. She did not attend the same charity events as Howard Alcott. She had agreed to review the emergency family access petition first thing in the morning. Leonard's voice carried the particular controlled satisfaction of a man who had just drawn the one card he needed. I went to bed at midnight. Not because I expected to sleep, but because Dorothy had looked at me with the expression she reserved for moments when she had decided something was non-negotiable, and she had said, "Jean, you are 67 years old, and you have been awake for 22 hours. Lie down." So I lay down on top of the covers, still in my clothes, and I stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around me. I was still staring at the ceiling when the vehicles arrived at 2 in the morning. Not 1. Not 2. 4, I counted the sets of headlights sweeping across the bedroom ceiling through the gap in the curtains. I was on my feet before the first door slammed. Dorothy sat up in bed, her hand going to my arm. "Jean." "Stay up here," I said. "Do not come down." "Jean." "Dorothy." I turned and looked at her in the dark. "Please." She pressed her lips together. She nodded once, a tight and furious movement. I went downstairs. I made it to the kitchen before the knock came, not a knock exactly, more the flat-handed impact of someone who was not asking for entry, but announcing it. I turned on the kitchen light. I put the kettle on the stove. Then I walked to the front door and opened it before they could hit it again. Detective Rourke filled the doorway. He was a broad man in his early 50s with a face that had been lived in hard and a jaw that sat slightly forward, the physical posture of someone who had spent a career using his size to manage situations before words became necessary. He was holding a folded document. "Eugene Stafford," he said. "Search warrant. Step aside." I looked at the warrant. It was signed by Judge Carver, Howard Alcott's judge. I stepped aside. They came in fast and practiced 6 officers spreading through the ground floor with the efficiency of people who had done this before and enjoyed it more than they should have. Rourke stayed near the front of the room, watching me the way a man watches something he has already decided he does not need to be careful with. "What are you looking for?" I asked. I kept my voice completely level. I set my hands on the kitchen counter and did not move them. "Whatever's here to find," Rourke said. "They found it in 12 minutes. Or rather, one of them put it there in 12 minutes, which is not the same thing but looked identical from across the room." A young officer, 20s buzz, cut the kind of tight, careful movements that suggested he was very aware of where his hands were, at all times crouched beside my recliner near the window. He made a show of looking under the cushion. When he straightened up, he was holding a clear plastic evidence bag containing a quantity of white powder that had not been in my house when I went to bed. "Sergeant." His voice was practiced neutral. "Got something over here." Rourke crossed the room. He took the bag from the officer and held it up to the light with a gloved hand, turning it slowly. Then he looked at me with an expression of theatrical disappointment that he had clearly rehearsed. "Well," he said, "looks like we found out where your daughter's habit came from, Mr. Stafford." Dorothy appeared at the top of the stairs. I had told her to stay up there. She had chosen not to. She was standing in her green cardigan with her hand on the banister looking down at Rourke with an expression I had only seen on her face a handful of times in 40 years of marriage. A cold, absolute fury that she was keeping perfectly still the way you keep a fire contained by not giving it air. "That is not my husband's," she said. Her voice did not shake at all. "And you know it." Rourke looked up at her. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay upstairs while we complete—" "That is not my husband's," Dorothy said again in exactly the same tone as if Rourke had not spoken. Rourke looked at me. I looked back at him. I let my eyes move just briefly and deliberately to the smoke detector mounted in the upper corner of the living room. The small red indicator light blinked steadily in the dark above the bookshelves. Rourke followed my gaze. He stared at the smoke detector for 2 full seconds. Then he crossed the room in 4 strides, reached up and tore it from the ceiling. He dropped it on the hardwood and brought his boot down on it twice. The plastic casing shattered. The components scattered. "Get him out," he said. His voice had changed. The rehearsed quality was gone, replaced by something tighter and less controlled. "Get him out right now. They put me in zip ties again." They walked me out through my own front door. Dorothy stood at the top of the stairs, watching, both hands gripping the banister. Her knuckles white, tears running straight down her face without any sound at all. She did not crumple. She did not look away. She stood there in her green cardigan and watched them walk her husband out of their home for the second time in 24 hours, and she kept her chin up the entire time. At the front door, I stopped. The officer behind me pressed his hand between my shoulder blades, but I held for 1 second and looked back at Dorothy. "Keep the light on," I said. She pressed her lips together hard. "I always do," she said. They walked me out into the dark. The second holding cell was identical to the first. Same fluorescent hum. Same concrete bench. Same drain in the floor that suggested a history better left unexamined. I sat down on the bench and put my elbows on my knees, and I thought about Eleanor Briggs's security camera mounted on her front porch at 412 Pembroke Court, angled across the street toward the Alcott Gate and the first 30 feet of their driveway. And then I thought about what else that camera could see depending on its field of view. Eleanor's house sat directly across Pembroke Court from the Alcott Gate. My house on Sycamore Drive in Donaldson was 4 miles away, but Eleanor's camera covered the street between her house and the Alcott property, including, depending on the angle, the curb in front of the Alcott Gate where camera crews from 3 different Nashville news stations had been parked since yesterday morning. That was not what mattered, though. What mattered was that when Eleanor Briggs had arrived at my house at 9:45 the previous evening, she had sat at my kitchen table for 40 minutes. And in those 40 minutes, Dorothy had been sitting across from her. And Dorothy, who taught elementary school for 31 years and understood better than most people that evidence is only useful if someone records it, had quietly taken out her phone and activated the camera application that Leonard had installed on it 6 months ago, the one that uploaded directly to a secure server that Leonard controlled. Dorothy had recorded every word Eleanor said. I was sitting on the concrete bench thinking about this when the cell door opened at 6:15 in the morning, and the guard said Leonard was there. The consultation room, the same table, the same humming light. But this time Leonard did not sit down. He stood at the head of the table with his tablet in his hands and pressed play without saying a word. The footage was Eleanor's camera. The timestamp read 2:07 a.m. The angle was from across the street looking toward my house, and because Eleanor's camera had a wide field of view and my living room window faced the street, and because Rourke's team had turned on every light in the house during the search, the interior of my living room was clearly visible through the glass. The footage showed a young officer with a buzz cut reach into his jacket pocket. It showed him remove a clear plastic bag. It showed him crouch beside a recliner, look over his shoulder once, and slide the bag under the cushion. The timestamp was 2:19 a.m., 12 minutes after they had entered the house, and 4 minutes before the same officer announced he had found something. The resolution was good. The angle was good. The timestamp was continuous and unbroken. Leonard set the tablet down on the table and looked at the booking sergeant, who had come in to observe because Leonard had specifically requested a supervisor be present before he pressed play. The sergeant was a different man from the night before, younger, with the look of someone who understood immediately that he was watching his department's morning get significantly worse. "You have 5 minutes to process my client's release," Leonard said. His voice was the voice he used when he had already won and was simply allowing the other side time to understand it. "After that, I file a federal civil rights complaint against this department, this precinct, and Detective Rourke personally. I also send this footage to every news outlet in the state of Tennessee." He paused. "And I call Judge Patricia Wynn, who is expecting my call at 8 this morning anyway, and I add evidence tampering to the family access petition we filed last night. I was out in 8 minutes. They gave me back my belt. They gave me back my keys." The young officer with the buzz cut was nowhere to be seen. Rourke's cruiser was gone from the parking lot. I did not ask where either of them had gone. I already knew that Leonard's team had sent the footage to 3 separate secure locations before Rourke's boot had finished coming down on the smoke detector. It had never been in the smoke detector to begin with. It had been uploading to Leonard's server from Eleanor's camera in real time all night. Outside, the morning was cold and pale, the sky the color of old pewter. Leonard fell into step beside me across the parking lot. "The video is already with the district attorney's office," he said. "Rourke will be suspended by noon. The officer who planted the evidence has retained private counsel, which tells me he was not acting alone, and he knows it." "Howard," I said. "Almost certainly." Leonard unlocked his sedan. "Which means Howard just handed us something we did not have before." He panicked Jean. He reached for the dirtiest tool available and he left fingerprints on it. I got into the passenger seat. I was tired in a way that went past the body and into something deeper, the accumulated weight of 2 days without proper sleep, and the specific exhaustion that comes from being required to stay calm when every instinct is screaming otherwise. But underneath it, something else was building. Something cold and methodical and very, very focused. "The press is outside my house," Leonard said, starting the engine. I know. I had seen the news alerts on my phone while waiting in the cell. The story had broken at 4 in the morning, the video, the evidence planting the second arrest. The narrative had shifted overnight from violent grandfather to something the reporters were still trying to find the right words for. "What do you want to do?" Leonard asked. I looked out the window at the gray Nashville morning. I thought about Laura in room 14 at Ridgeline, sedated and alone. I thought about Dorothy standing at the top of the stairs with her hands white on the banister. I thought about Eleanor Briggs driving across town in the dark, with a hard drive pressed against her side. "Drive me home," I said. "I have something to say." There were 7 news vans on Sycamore Drive. I counted them from the end of the block. I straightened my jacket. I walked up my own driveway through the crowd of cameras and microphones, and I stopped on my front porch, and I waited for them to settle. Then I told Nashville exactly who the Alcott family was. Not with anger, not with tears. With documents, with dates, with the names of accounts, and the amounts of money, and the name of a young woman who had been doing nothing but trying to hold her life together while the people around her systematically took it apart. I spoke for 4 minutes. Then I went inside and closed the door. By noon, Howard Alcott's name was trending across every platform in Tennessee. And somewhere across town in a house in Brentwood that I now held the debt on the walls were beginning to close in. Judge Wynne signed the order Sunday morning, 2 hours after Leonard filed the emergency petition. Leonard texted me the confirmation while I was still standing on my front porch after the press had dispersed the words appearing on my screen in his characteristically spare style, order signed. Access granted. Facility must comply within 24 hours or face contempt. Call me. I called him. We talked for 11 minutes. Then I went inside, ate the bowl of soup Dorothy had left on the stove, and sat in my recliner with the lights off until 3 in the morning, going over the layout of Ridgeline Recovery Center in my head, the way I used to go over blueprints the night before a complicated pour. I had worked that site in the spring of 2009. Foundation footings, the underground utility runs along the west side of the building. I knew where the load-bearing walls were. I knew which wing had been added in a second construction phase, which meant different contractors, different material specs, different quality of work. I knew that the secondary entrance on the west side of the building, the one used for supply deliveries, had a magnetic lock on a separate circuit from the main security system. I knew this because I had run that circuit myself, and I had run it to a breaker box mounted inside a utility closet that was accessible from the outside of the building, through a panel that required a standard Robertson screwdriver to open. I had a Robertson screwdriver in the glove box of the Silverado. I had put it there in 2019 and never taken it out. Marcus picked me up at 3:45. He drove a gray Tahoe that was nondescript enough to belong to anyone. We did not talk much on the way out. The road climbed east into the hills outside Nashville, leaving the city lights behind, and by the time we reached the gravel access road that led up to Ridgeline, the sky was the deep, specific black that comes in the hour before dawn starts to think about arriving. I had the court order in my jacket pocket. I also had the Robertson screwdriver. Dr. Merritt was waiting at the west entrance, exactly where she had said she would be. She was a compact woman in her late 40s, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had not slept any more than I had, and the particular expression of someone who has decided to do a difficult thing and is not going to permit themselves to reconsider it. She did not offer a handshake. She held the door. "Room 14 is at the end of the lower corridor," she said, falling into step beside me. The night staff consists of 2 orderlies and a nurse at the main desk. I told the nurse I needed to check on a patient. She did not ask questions. She paused. She rarely does when I ask. The corridor smelled the way hospital corridors smell everywhere: antiseptic and recycled air, and the particular human staleness of a place where people sleep in rooms without windows. My boots were loud on the linoleum. I shortened my stride. Room 14 had a narrow, rectangular window set into the door at eye level. I stopped in front of it and looked through. Laura was in the bed. She was on her back, one arm along her side, the other resting across her stomach, where an IV line ran up to a bag hanging on a pole beside the bed. The room was lit by a single small light above the bed, and in that light, her face looked very young and very still, the way faces look when people are sleeping too deeply, pushed down into unconsciousness by something chemical rather than something natural. My hand went flat against the door. Dr. Merritt swiped her access card. The lock clicked. I pushed the door open and crossed the room in 4 steps. "Laura?" I sat on the edge of the bed and put my hand on her arm above the IV site. "Laura, baby, it's Dad." Nothing for 2 seconds. Then her eyelids moved a slow, labored flutter like someone trying to surface from a very long way down. Her lips parted. "Dad." The word came out thick and dragged like it had weight. Her eyes opened halfway unfocused, moving across the ceiling before they found my face. When they did, something in her expression shifted, not waking up exactly, but something underneath the sedation responding to a frequency the drugs could not reach. "Dad, you came." "I came." I kept my voice low and steady. I need you to stay awake for me. Can you do that? I'm trying. Her free hand moved toward me, reaching, and I took it. Her fingers were cold, and her grip was weak, but it was there. I kept telling myself, every day. I kept saying he's coming. He always comes. My throat tightened around something I did not have time to feel right now. I reached up and carefully removed the IV line. Dr. Merritt had already stopped the drip from the hall, so there was no alarm. I pressed a square of gauze over the site and bent Laura's arm up gently to hold it. Can you sit up? I asked. I think so. She tried. She made it halfway before her arms shook with the effort, and I got my arm behind her shoulders and brought her the rest of the way up. She swayed. I held her. You're okay, I said. I've got you. She turned her face into my shoulder and held on. I got her to her feet. She could stand barely. Her legs took her weight, but not confidently, and she leaned into me as we moved toward the door. Dr. Merritt was in the corridor, her expression watchful and professionally composed. Two orderlies appeared at the far end of the hallway, moving toward us with the automatic purposefulness of people responding to movement they had not authorized. Dr. Merritt stepped forward before they reached us. She drew herself up to her full height, which was not considerable, and looked at both men with the flat, absolute authority of someone who had spent 20 years being the most competent person in whatever room she occupied. I am the attending physician on this patient, she said. I am issuing a clinical discharge based on my independent assessment that continued sedation constitutes a risk to patient welfare. If either of you interferes with this discharge, I will have your certifications reviewed by the State Medical Board before the end of the business week. She held their gaze. Stand down. They looked at each other. They looked at Laura sagging against my side. They looked back at Dr. Merritt. Whatever calculation they ran, it came out in our favor. They stepped aside. I walked my daughter out into the pre-dawn dark, and I put her in the passenger seat of Marcus's Tahoe, and I wrapped my jacket around her shoulders because she was shivering and the morning was cold. She leaned her head back against the headrest and closed her eyes, and for a moment she just breathed, slow and uneven, but getting steadier the way breathing does when the thing that was suppressing it starts to clear. Marcus pulled out of the lot without being asked. The gravel crunched under the tires. The facility disappeared behind us in the dark. Laura turned her head toward me. Her eyes were more focused now, tracking. She opened her mouth and then closed it again like she was deciding something. Dad, she said finally. There's something I need to tell you about the night of the accident on Route 40. I went very still. Before I tell you what Laura whispered to me in that car at 5:30 in the morning, what she had been carrying alone for 14 months, comment the word justice so I know you're still riding with me. Because what comes next changes everything. Note some elements in what follows are fictional shaped to carry the message further. If this kind of story isn't for you, this is a natural place to stop, and I respect that completely. I did not say anything. Not because I had nothing to say, but because Laura needed to say this without interruption, and I knew that if I spoke before she was finished, the part of her that had been holding this for 2 years might close back up around it, the way a wound closes around something that should not be inside it. Marcus drove. The Tahoe moved down the dark gravel road, headlights cutting a narrow channel through the trees on either side. The heater was running. Outside, the Tennessee hills were invisible in the pre-dawn black. Laura pulled my jacket tighter around her shoulders. She stared at the windshield for a moment, at the darkness rushing past. And then she began. It was a Saturday night, she said. About 14 months ago. Preston had been drinking since early afternoon. He had a bad week at work. He did not tell me the details, but I could tell by the way he came home that something had gone wrong with money. She paused. He wanted to go to dinner. I told him I would drive. He said he was fine. Her voice was flat and careful, the voice of someone reciting facts they have rehearsed in their own head many times. He was not fine. He took his Mustang. I got in the passenger seat because arguing with him when he was like that made things worse. I kept my hands flat on my knees. I kept my face forward. We were on Route 40, Laura continued. The stretch east of the city near the reservoir. It was dark. No streetlights out there. Preston was driving too fast, and he was angry about something I had said, something at dinner that set him off. I don't even remember what it was anymore. He took his eyes off the road to look at me. She stopped, swallowed. There was a woman on the shoulder, walking her bicycle. She had a light on it, one of those small rear lights blinking red. I saw it. And then Preston's headlights hit her, and I screamed, and... She stopped again, pressed her lips together hard. He didn't brake, she said. He didn't swerve. He hit her at full speed, and he kept driving. He accelerated. He drove for almost a mile before he pulled off onto a logging road and stopped the car. Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly, and then she pulled it back together by force. He was shaking. He was crying. He called Howard. Not 911. Howard. How long before Howard arrived? I asked. My voice came out quieter than I intended. 20 minutes. Maybe 25. He brought 2 men with him. I didn't know them. And the family lawyer Gerald Pratt. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were dry, which told me she had cried about this so many times that the crying had been exhausted. They told me to get in Howard's car and not to look. But you looked, I said. I looked. She turned back to the windshield. They drove back to where it happened. The woman, she was gone. She was already gone when they got back there. They put her in the driver's seat of her own car. She had a car parked just off the shoulder a little further down the road. I think she had a flat tire. I think that was why she was walking. Laura's voice thinned to almost nothing. They staged it to look like she had lost control and hit a tree. They took Preston's Mustang to a garage somewhere that night. I never saw it again. The Tahoe moved through the dark hills. Marcus had not said a single word. He drove like a man who understood that his job right now was to be invisible. Her name was Amanda Reeves, Laura said. She was 24 years old. She was a nursing student at Belmont University. I found out later when the story was in the paper. I have thought about her every single day since. Amanda Reeves, 24 years old, nursing student. I let the name settle into my memory, the way you let something important settle deliberately, carefully, making sure it would not move. They told you to stay quiet, I said. They told me Preston had a future, that I had nothing to back up my version of events, that Preston's word against mine with the Alcott family behind him meant my version would never be believed. Laura turned to look at me again, and in the weak gray light that was beginning to show at the eastern edge of the sky, I could see that her face had changed from what it was when I first found her on the floor of that bedroom 2 days ago. Something had come back into it. Something that had been pressed down for a very long time. When I told Preston I was going to the police, that was when things changed. That was when the doctor's appointments started. That was when the pills started appearing in my food. That was when he started building the file. I looked at her for a long moment. My daughter. 34 years old, wrapped in my old jacket, sitting in a borrowed car in the Tennessee hills at 5:30 in the morning, telling me the things she had been carrying alone for 14 months. Laura, I said, do you still have the phone, the old one? The one Caleb used to call me? She blinked. It's in my drawer at the house, at the Alcott house. Does it have anything on it from that night? She was quiet for a moment. I triggered the panic app, she said slowly. The one you put on it years ago. When Preston started driving too fast, I was scared, and I reached into my bag and I triggered it without thinking. I don't know if it caught anything. I don't know if it was still recording when... It records until it is manually stopped, I said. And it uploads automatically. She stared at me. Dad, Staxisum. The app uploads to a server I control, I said. Everything it recorded that night is sitting on that server right now. I reached over and put my hand over hers. You have been carrying this alone for 14 months. You do not have to carry it anymore. Laura turned her face away. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Her shoulders shook once hard, and then she pulled in a long, unsteady breath and let it out slowly. When she turned back, her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. What do we do now? She asked. I looked out at the eastern sky. The first pale light was beginning to separate the hills from the darkness above them. We go home first, I said. Your mother needs to know you're safe, and then we go to work. The kitchen light was on. Of course it was. It was always on. Marcus pulled the Tahoe to the curb in front of the house on Sycamore Drive at 7:07 in the morning. The sky had gone from black to pale gray to the first thin wash of blue, and the October air coming through the cracked window smelled of wood smoke and wet leaves, the specific smell of Nashville in the fall that I had been breathing my entire life without ever thinking about it until this moment when it hit me like something I had almost lost. Laura was more alert than she had been an hour ago. The sedatives were still working their way out of her system, making her movements careful, and her eyes slightly unfocused at the edges, but she was present. She had been watching the neighborhoods pass outside the window on the drive back, recognizing streets, orienting herself. When Marcus turned onto Sycamore Drive, and she saw the house, the red brick, the white trim, the maple in the front yard, dropping its last leaves, she made a sound that was not quite a word. I got out and went around to her side. She took my arm and we walked up the front path together, her steps slow, but her grip steady. The front door opened before we reached it. Dorothy came out onto the porch in her green cardigan and her house slippers, and she stopped at the top of the steps. She looked at Laura, really looked the way a mother looks at a child she has been terrified for, taking in the thinness of her, the pallor, the borrowed jacket around her shoulders. Dorothy's face did something complicated and private that I looked away from, because some expressions between mothers and daughters are not meant to be witnessed by anyone else. Then Dorothy came down the steps and wrapped both arms around Laura and held on. Laura buried her face in her mother's shoulder and started crying, not the controlled, exhausted crying of someone who has been worn down to their last resources, but the loud, ugly, gasping kind that comes when you have finally reached somewhere safe enough to fall apart completely. Her knees buckled slightly, and Dorothy held her up, both arms locked around her, one hand pressed to the back of Laura's head, swaying slightly, the way she used to when Laura was small and had a nightmare. "I've got you," Dorothy said. Her voice was rough and tight and absolutely certain. "I've got you, baby. You're home." I stood at the bottom of the porch steps and watched my wife hold my daughter in the early morning light. My chest ached with something that had no name precise enough to be useful. I pressed my fist briefly against my sternum, then lowered it. I gave them 3 minutes. Then I carried Laura inside. Dorothy had soup on the stove, the same pot from 2 nights ago, kept warm on low heat, as though she had known it would be needed eventually. She settled Laura at the kitchen table with a blanket around her shoulders and a bowl in front of her, and sat beside her with her hand over Laura's hand on the table. I called Leonard from the back porch. "She's home," I said when he picked up. "She's safe. We need to move on the criminal referral. I want the DA's office to have the audio file from the panic app today." "I anticipated that," Leonard said. I have already pulled the file from the server and had it reviewed by a forensic audio analyst overnight. The recording is 14 minutes and 32 seconds long. It captures the impact Preston's voice, the call to Howard, and approximately 4 minutes of conversation at the scene. The analyst confirms the recording is authentic and unaltered. A pause. Gene. This is manslaughter at minimum. Depending on what the DA decides about intent, it could be charged higher. Send everything to the DA's office before noon, I said. And Leonard, I want a motion filed to freeze all Alcott assets pending the criminal investigation. If Preston gets wind of what's coming, he will move money. Already drafted, Leonard said. I will file at 9 when the courthouse opens. I was still on the back porch, my coffee going cold in my hand, when my phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. Gene. His voice had the specific quality it got when something had gone wrong, and he was managing his own reaction. I just got a call from the front desk administrator at St. Andrew's Elementary, Caleb's school. Preston arrived 20 minutes ago and signed Caleb out early. I turned around and looked through the kitchen window. Dorothy and Laura were still at the table. Laura had both hands around her soup bowl. Dorothy was talking low and steady. How did he look? I asked. The administrator said he seemed her word was agitated. She tried to reach Laura as the primary contact. No answer. She went to the emergency list and called you. Marcus paused. Gene Preston knows about the audio. The DA's office intake line has been open since 7, someone talked. I set the coffee cup down on the porch railing. The ceramic made a sharp sound against the wood. Where is Howard? I asked. His car left the Brentwood house 40 minutes ago, Marcus said. I lost the tail on the interstate. He could be anywhere. I looked at the kitchen window again. Laura was laughing at something Dorothy had said, a small, fragile, genuine laugh that looked like it had surprised her. It was the first time I had seen her laugh in longer than I could remember. I turned away from the window. Find Preston, I said. Find Caleb. Call me the moment you have anything. I went inside. I sat at the table across from Laura. I picked up my coffee, and I asked her about Caleb, how he had been sleeping, whether he had been eating well, whether he had said anything in the past weeks that had worried her. I asked because I wanted to know, and I asked because she did not need to know right now that her son was in the hands of a desperate man. I would handle it. That was what fathers did. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Marcus, 4 words. I excused myself from the table before Laura could see my face change. The hallway closet. Top shelf behind the Christmas ornaments, the fireproof lockbox. I opened it, took what I needed, documents, and the other thing. A Smith & Wesson Model 10.38 Special. I had not touched it in 4 years. My hands were steady as I checked the cylinder. 6 rounds. I put it in my inside jacket pocket. I went back to the kitchen doorway. Dorothy was still sitting beside Laura, her hand over Laura's hand on the table. She looked up and found my face the way she always did, and read it completely in about half a second. Her jaw tightened. She gave me one small nod. 40 years of marriage. We did not need more than that. I went out to the Silverado. Marcus called before I cleared the end of the block. Gun was purchased at a pawn shop on Nolansville Pike 40 minutes ago. Legal transaction. Preston has a carry permit. Paid cash. Shop owner said he was shaking. A pause. Black Mustang registered to Howard Alcott is parked outside a storage facility on Murfreesboro Pike. Preston's card hit a gas station 2 blocks away, same time frame. The Mustang hasn't moved in 30 minutes. Caleb, I asked. No visual. But Gene, he's in there. Send me the address. I took I-24 south through the morning rush, moving through traffic with the kind of focused patience that has nothing to do with calm and everything to do with knowing you cannot afford to be stopped. My phone rang again. Leonard. Howard Alcott walked into the DA's office at 8:45 this morning, he said. Voluntarily. Requesting a cooperation agreement. He is giving them Preston and Sylvia in exchange for reduced charges on his own involvement in Route 40. I pulled into the storage facility lot and stopped the truck. The Mustang was there. Howard turned on his own son, I said. Howard turned on everyone the moment the charges became real, Leonard said. But Gene Preston knows. His father called him. He knows the audio exists. He knows it is over. A man with nothing left is the most dangerous kind there is. I ended the call. I got out slowly. Unit 12 roll-up door down padlock hanging open. And from behind it, faint but unmistakable, the sound of a small child talking to himself. The way kids talk when the silence frightens them, and they need to fill it with something, anything, just to feel less alone. I stopped 6 feet from the door. Preston. Conversational. Easy. The voice I used on job sites when something had gone wrong and panic would make it worse. It's Gene. Just me. No police. I want to talk. Movement inside. Then Preston's voice came through the metal door, pitched higher than I had ever heard it. How did you find me? I built half this city, I said. I know people everywhere. That's not what matters. What matters is that Caleb is 5 years old and he is scared. Let me take him home. A long pause. It's over, isn't it? Not a question. Yes, I said. It is. Howard called me. Preston's voice cracked down the middle. He said he was cooperating. His own son, and he left me. He said it was the only choice. A sound that might have been a laugh or something worse. He left me. I know, I said. Preston, open the door. The door rattled and rose. Preston was sitting on an overturned plastic crate dress shirt, untucked tie, gone the jacket he had been so careful to put back on before the police took him last time, nowhere in sight. The gun rested on his right knee, pointed at the floor. His eyes were red and raw, and the face beneath them belonged to a 37-year-old man who had finally run out of road. In the far corner, on a folded moving blanket, Caleb sat with his little legs straight out in front of him, still in his school uniform. He was looking at me with an expression of such pure, uncomplicated relief that it hit me behind the sternum like something physical. Grandpa. His voice was thin, steady. 5 years old in a storage unit with a frightened man, and he had held himself together. Hey, buddy. I kept my eyes on Preston, but I put everything warm I had into my voice for the boy. I'm here. You did so good. Can you come to me? Caleb stood. He took 3 steps and then stopped, looking back at his father. Preston was staring at the floor. The gun lay forgotten on his knee. He looked like a man who had been running for a very long time and had simply stopped and did not know what stopping felt like. Let him come to me, Preston, I said quietly. Preston looked up at his son. He looked at me. Something moved through his face that I did not try to name. He nodded once. Caleb ran. I caught him with one arm and pulled him in against my side, and his small hands gripped the back of my jacket with a strength that surprised me every time. He pressed his face into my ribs. Grandpa, he said, his voice muffled in my jacket. You smell like sawdust. My throat locked up completely. I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose until I trusted my voice. Yeah, buddy. I managed. I know. Behind me, Marcus's footsteps crossed the asphalt. Preston heard them. Whatever he saw in my face or past me in the doorway took the last of the resistance out of him. His shoulders dropped. He set the gun down on the concrete floor beside the crate carefully, the way you set something down that you are completely finished with. "I'll wait," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." I turned and walked out into the morning with my grandson in my arms. Marcus was leaning against the Tahoe when I walked out of the storage unit with Caleb on my hip. He looked at the boy, then at me, then at the open door behind us where Preston was still sitting on his plastic crate with the gun on the floor beside him. Marcus straightened up. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced his phone already dialing. "I'll make the call," he said. "Do it," I said. I carried Caleb to the Silverado and put him in the passenger seat. He was 5 years old, and the seat was designed for an adult, so he sat very upright, with his feet dangling and his hands folded in his lap, watching me with the serious, steady eyes of a child who has been through something and is still processing whether it is over. I crouched down beside the open door so we were at eye level. "Are you hurt anywhere?" I asked. "Did anyone hurt you?" He shook his head. "Daddy didn't hurt me. He just kept saying stuff on the phone. He was crying." Caleb looked at his hands. "I didn't know daddies could cry like that." "Everyone cries sometimes, buddy," I said. "Even daddies." He thought about this. "Are you going to cry, Grandpa?" I looked at his face. The gap where a baby tooth had come out last month, the smudge of something on his chin that might have been breakfast, the school uniform that was slightly too big across the shoulders, because Laura had bought it with room to grow. I thought about the dresser he pushed in front of his door. I thought about the drawing his teacher had called Laura about the one where Mommy was crying and Daddy was yelling, and a grandfather stood far away outside a window. "Not right now," I said. "Right now, I need to drive you to see your mama." His face changed completely. "Mama's home." "She's home," I said. "She's been waiting for you." He grabbed the seatbelt himself with both hands and began working it across his lap with the determined concentration of someone performing a very important task. I reached in and helped him click it into place. Then I straightened up and looked back at the storage unit. 2 police cruisers had turned into the lot, moving slowly. Marcus was standing near the entrance to Unit 12 with his hands visible and his identification already out, explaining the situation in the calm, practiced manner of a man who had done this before. Preston appeared in the doorway of the unit. He had picked his jacket up off the floor and put it back on, which struck me as the saddest kind of dignity, the instinct to make yourself presentable for the worst moment of your life. He did not resist. He put his hands behind his back when the officer asked him to. He did not look at me as they walked him toward the cruiser. But just before they put him in the back seat, he stopped and turned his head. And for a moment, he looked at Caleb in the passenger seat of my truck. Caleb was looking back at him through the windshield. Neither of them said anything. Then the officer's hand touched Preston's shoulder, and he got in the car and the door closed. And that was the last time for a very long time that my grandson saw his father as a free man. I got in the truck. I started the engine. "Grandpa," Caleb said. "Yeah, buddy." "Is Daddy going to be okay?" I put the truck in reverse and looked over my shoulder to back out of the space. I thought about the question, the way I thought about all the questions children asked that did not have answers simple enough to be honest and gentle at the same time. "Your daddy made some mistakes," I said carefully. "Big ones. And when people make big mistakes, sometimes there are consequences that take a long time to work through." I pulled out onto Murfreesboro Pike heading north. "But you are going to be okay. And your mama is going to be okay. And that is what matters most right now." Caleb looked out the passenger window at the city going by. "Grandma Dorothy made soup," he said after a moment. Did she make enough for me? Something in my chest unwound about 3 full turns. I am pretty sure your grandmother made enough soup to feed the entire state of Tennessee, I said. He nodded, satisfied with this answer, and went back to looking out the window. Leonard called at 10:45. Preston is in custody, he said, charged with kidnapping, unlawful restraint of a minor, and carrying a firearm in the commission of a felony. The DA's office is also formally charging him with vehicular manslaughter in the death of Amanda Reeves, based on Howard's statement and the audio recording. A pause. Sylvia was picked up at the Brentwood house an hour ago. She is being charged with obstruction of justice accessory, after the fact, and fraud related to the foundation accounts. Another pause. Howard's cooperation agreement is being finalized. He will plead to accessory after the fact and obstruction. Likely 3 to 5 years, possibly less, with good behavior. I drove north on the interstate with my grandson in the passenger seat. And the assets? I asked. The freeze order is in effect, Leonard said. Nothing moves without court approval. The Brentwood property is encumbered by our lien. The foundation accounts are under DA review. He cleared his throat. There is one more thing. The DA's office called me 20 minutes ago. They have a victim notification process for families of victims in cases going to trial. Amanda Reeves had a mother. Her name is Carol Reeves. She lives in Murfreesboro. He paused. She has been told a case is being opened. She has been told there will be a trial. She asked if she could speak with Laura at some point when Laura is ready. I thought about Amanda Reeves. 24 years old, nursing student. A bicycle with a small red blinking light. A mother in Murfreesboro who had spent 14 months believing her daughter died alone in a random accident. Tell the DA's office yes, I said, when Laura is ready. I pulled onto Sycamore Drive at 11:15. The kitchen light was still on. I parked the truck, came around to the passenger side, and lifted Caleb down from the seat. He grabbed my hand. We walked up the front path together, his small hand in mine. And before we reached the porch, the front door opened, and Laura appeared in the doorway, still wrapped in the blanket Dorothy had put around her shoulders. Her face doing something that could not be described as any single emotion, because it was all of them at once. "Mama," Caleb said, and let go of my hand, and ran. I stood on the front path, and watched my daughter drop to her knees on the porch, and catch her son pulling him in against her chest, with both arms, her face buried in his hair. She was laughing and crying at the same time, the sounds running together into something that was neither and both. Dorothy appeared behind Laura in the doorway. She looked at me over their heads. Her eyes were wet, and her chin was trembling, and she was smiling with her whole face. I climbed the porch steps. I put my arm around my wife. We stood together in the October morning and watched our daughter hold her son. And I thought about how many times over the past 4 days I had been afraid I would never see this exact moment. It was worth every single thing it had cost. 3 weeks later, I sat in the front row of Courtroom 4 at the Davidson County Criminal Justice Center and watched my daughter tell the truth. The room smelled of lemon polish and old wood. Preston sat at the defense table in a suit that no longer fit. 3 weeks of pretrial detention had taken weight off him, and the jacket hung loose at the shoulders in a way that made him look like exactly what he was. Diminished. His lawyer sat beside him with a face composed into professional neutrality, the expression of a man managing a loss rather than pursuing a victory. Laura was on the stand. She wore the dark green dress Dorothy had pressed that morning. Hair pulled back, spine straight in a way that looked like it was costing her something, and she had decided it was worth paying. She had been up there 40 minutes. She had not wavered once. The prosecutor, Karen Holt, leaned forward. "Ms. Stafford, you have described the events of that night in detail. You have told this jury that your husband was driving under the influence, that he struck and killed Amanda Reeves on Route 40, and that he left the scene without rendering aid or contacting emergency services. A pause. Is there anything that corroborates your account beyond your own testimony? Laura reached into the folder on the rail. She produced a phone, small old, the screen scratched across one corner. This is my phone, she said. An older model I stopped using 2 years ago. My father installed a panic application on it when I first got married. It records audio when activated and uploads automatically to a secure server. She set it down. I activated it the night of the accident because Preston was driving too fast, and I was frightened. I did not remember I had done it until my father told me. She looked at the jury directly for the first time. The recording is 14 minutes and 32 seconds long. A forensic analyst has confirmed it is authentic. Your Honor. Karen Holt said, "We would like to play the recording for the jury." The audio filled the courtroom. I had heard it once before in Leonard's office. Hearing it here was different. The sound of impact. Laura's scream. Preston's voice shifting in real time from shock to calculation. The call to Howard. Howard's voice already organizing, already treating a dead 24-year-old woman as a problem with a solution. The sound of 2 men deciding that Amanda Reeves's life was something to be managed rather than mourned. 3 jurors were crying before it ended. A 4th had his jaw locked so tight, the muscle in his cheek was visibly working. Preston's lawyer did not cross-examine Laura. There was nothing useful to ask. Eleanor Briggs took the stand and testified for 22 minutes in the precise, unhurried manner of a woman who had spent 30 years as a middle school librarian and understood that accuracy was non-negotiable. She described what she had witnessed at the Alcott property over 11 years. She described her security camera footage. She described the night Rourke's team came through my living room. When the defense lawyer asked whether she was certain of what she had seen, Eleanor looked at him over her reading glasses with an expression of polite, absolute disdain. "Young man," she said, "I have been watching the same street for 11 years. I am quite certain of what I saw." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Vehicular manslaughter, obstruction of justice, fraud, domestic abuse. The judge sentenced Preston to 18 years. Under Tennessee mandatory minimums for vehicular manslaughter resulting in death, he would serve at least 12 before any possibility of parole. Sylvia received 5 years. Howard's cooperation agreement held 3 years minimum security, eligible for early release at 18 months. The gavel came down. Laura sat very still. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her eyes were full, but she was not crying. She looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just been told she could set it down. I reached across the bar and took her hand. She gripped it hard. Outside in thin November sunlight, Leonard shook my hand and mentioned asset timelines, which I heard with about half my attention, because Caleb had appeared at Laura's side and was pulling on her sleeve, asking about hot chocolate. "Yes," Laura said, laughing, the real one. The laugh that had been coming back gradually over 3 weeks, getting easier each time. "Absolutely, yes." Dorothy linked her arm through mine on the courthouse steps. The plaza trees had gone bare branches clean against a pale sky. "It's done," Dorothy said. "Most of it," I said. She looked at me. "Jean." "It's done," I said. "You're right." 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in April, I sat on the back porch of the house on Sycamore Drive, with a cup of coffee and the specific stillness that comes when everything that needed doing has been done. The yard was going green again. A robin worked the grass near the fence with business-like focus. Caleb came around the corner on his bicycle, new blue training wheels still attached over his ongoing objections. He was pedaling hard, tongue between his teeth hair in 6 directions. "Grandpa, watch. Watch me go fast." "I'm watching," I said. He went fast. He lost control near the garden bed, overcorrected, and sat down in the grass with a thump. He examined his knee. He looked at me. He decided it did not hurt enough to matter, stood up and picked the bike back up with the practical resilience of a 6-year-old who had figured out that falling was mostly just a pause. Laura came out the back door with her coffee, leaning in the doorframe in jeans and an old sweatshirt. She looked rested. That still surprised me, the way health comes back into a face like light returning to a room that has been dark too long. Dorothy settled into the chair beside mine with her tea. The 4 of us filled the small backyard with the sounds of an ordinary Saturday morning. Caleb narrating his own progress. Laura calling encouragement. Dorothy and I sitting in the April warmth with our drinks. I had spent 40 years building things meant to last. When it mattered most, everything I had built had been exactly enough. But this yard, this morning, this grandson, this daughter in the doorway, this was what all of it had ever been for. I took a sip of coffee. It had gone slightly cool. I drank it anyway. Some things you hold on to exactly as they are. People ask me sometimes what I learned from all of this. I learned that silence is not the same as peace. For too long, I told myself I was respecting my daughter's choices when the truth was, I was afraid of the conflict. I looked away from the long sleeves at Christmas. I accepted the excuses. I told myself things would work themselves out. They did not work themselves out. They got worse quietly behind closed doors while I tended my lawn and minded my business. Do not be like me. If something feels wrong with someone you love, ask. Push. Stay present. The cost of asking an uncomfortable question is nothing compared to the cost of the answer arriving too late. I also learned that what a man builds in silence can outlast everything that tries to destroy him. I never needed anyone to know what I had. I only needed it to be there when my family needed it most. God gave me the time and the health and the stubbornness to build something worth protecting. I am grateful for that every single day. And I believe this: a family is not the house you live in or the name above the door. A family is the people who leave the kitchen light on every night without being asked, no matter how late it gets. This has been one of those family revenge grandpastories that I hope stayed with you. If this story moved you in any way, leave a comment below and tell me what moment hit you the hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe stories like this one matter, please subscribe so you never miss the next one. These grandpastories and every revenge story we tell here exist because of you. Thank you for staying until the very end. One final note. Some stories on this channel contain fictional elements created for the purpose of reflection and understanding. If this type of content is not for you, we respect that completely. There is something here for everyone, and we trust you to choose what serves you best. Until next time, take care of your people.